Flores relating to prohibitions on camping in a public place.
Chair recognizes Mr. Capriglione to explain the bill.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, Senate Bill 241 updates existing statute to better enforce the state's public camping ban and ensures local jurisdictions are enforcing the ban. So just a little bit of background, even with the passage of House Bill 1925 in 2019, which made it a state crime to camp in a public location outside of a designated campsite, many places, as you know, still have open campsites throughout their cities. The burden of cleaning up these campsites has fallen on the state, which has resulted in significant costs for abatement efforts. Additionally, the Attorney General has found it challenging to seek injunctive relief under the existing statutory framework. What this bill does is specifies that local entities must investigate and enforce violations of the public camping ban following written complaints. Now, once a complaint is submitted by the public, the local entity has 90 days, 3 months, to resolve the complaint. If the local entity does not resolve the complaint within that time, the Attorney General issues a written declaration that the local entity is a violating local entity. This bill authorizes the Attorney General or DPS to enforce the camping ban and allows a comptroller to withhold sales taxes for the amount of money the state spends enforcing the ban. Additionally, the bill clarifies that local entities may not use designated properties for camping unless they have applied for and received approval from the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs. These changes are needed to make sure that we enforce the ban and continue to allow open camping in local jurisdictions.
Ms. Hinojosa, for what purpose?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
The gentleman yield for questions.
Yes.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you. Representative Capriglione, so my understanding of your bill is, and you gave a pretty good explanation, but just let me check for understanding. So this is giving the Attorney General and DPS enforcement authority over people who are homeless, who are on the streets, if they,
No.
so cleaning up any encampments, but even just an individual who is homeless who the city is not taking action to clear off the streets if there's a complaint made. Is that right?
No, what it does is it allows the Attorney General to enforce, along with the comptroller, to enforce the current laws that are in place by reinforcing the fact that the law is the law, and that if they don't enforce the current camping ban, even after a complaint by local citizens, then they will pay for that enforcement to occur.
Okay, you give the authority to, and the enforcement of what? To clear out a site or to take somebody who is homeless off the street?
In 2019, we passed a camping ban that says that cities have to enforce those laws, that they have to enforce individuals who are unlawfully camping in public spaces.
Okay, and so to enforce would mean to clear them out. Is that correct?
This bill is to enforce, and I hate to put it this way, but it's to enforce the enforcement. The law already is that those cities and those counties should be doing this already. But as you can see here in Austin and cities like Dallas and other places, that those ordinances that have kind of prevented those camps from being removed are still in place, and that those enforcements are not happening. So that's why this legislation is absolutely needed, because the state has been the one footing the bill for the cities that have failed to address the homeless camping in their jurisdiction. And whether it's in my area in Fort Worth or in Dallas or here we're in Austin, everybody knows that these camping restrictions, on homeless camping restrictions, have not been enforced. So that's why this legislation is necessary, to make sure that once and for all that it is being done.
Okay, so you said the enforcement authority to enforce is to given either to the Attorney General or DPS. What would it look like? What does it look like for the Attorney General to enforce the enforcement, as you said?
So let's start at the beginning. What happens is, again, this is a law and it already should be happening. But citizens have noticed that it is not. So what this requires is for these municipalities or the county to be able to have an intake where individuals can complain. And in the city of Fort Worth, for instance, there's an app where individuals can easily go and take a photo and ask the city to enforce the current law. At that point, the cities are given 90 days to do that, and if not, they will be considered a violating local entity. And once that happens, then DPS or the Attorney General will go and request for that enforcement to occur. There will be a cost to that, and that cost will come out of that government entities who's in violation of this law.
Okay, but I'm asking a very specific question again. What does it look like for the Attorney General to enforce? What specifically does the Attorney General do to enforce the enforcement?
I feel like I've answered your question.
Well,
I mean, what it does is it says, under the Attorney General section, for each complaint received, the local entity should take an action. If the local entity does not take the required action, the Attorney General shall issue a written declaration that the local entity is a violating local entity for that fiscal year, and the Attorney General then shall send a copy of those declarations to the local entity and the comptroller, and once the comptroller receives that written notice, then part of what will happen is certain tax receipts will not be remitted back to the state, to the government entity.
Okay, but what you're just saying is that there's a declaration issued by the Attorney General, and then they withhold money, but that does nothing to impact a homeless camp that's not
Well,
being taken care of.
Well, if a municipality or a county does not want to lose those sales tax receipts, if they don't want to lose those dollars, they will pay for it. And the cleanup or the removal of that homeless camping will, unfortunately, once again, come down to the state to take care of, but this time there will be an invoice.
How does the state take care of it? The Attorney General's enforcing. You say they issue a declaration, then they take money away from the city, but how are they enforcing? What happens to the people living on the street is what I keep trying to ask you in many different ways.
Well, if you go back to the camping ban that we had, there's, first of all, TDHCA has the ability to go and create locations where this is allowable. There's also, as you know, the state has funded through appropriations support for nonprofit organizations and others to be able to help those homeless that are in need, whether it's on work, whether it's on housing. There's a variety of services that are available to those who are homeless, everything from mental health to emergency care to, in some cases, even housing. And some of that cost has absolutely been appropriated by us to go and help those organizations, and some of that has also been given to the state. I don't know what you're leading to, but the same conversation I had almost exactly 6 years ago today was that there is no criminalizing of this. There's none of this is to go and put the homeless in jail or anything like that. Ultimately, what this bill will do and what this law will do is it will do what I think we all want to happen. Nobody here, I hope nobody here, wants these homeless individuals to stay out in the street. None of us want them to live under a bridge in the cold like happened in Winter Storm Uri, where so many of them were either seriously hurt, even amputated in some cases. But the right place to put individuals who are unsheltered is not to live under a bridge, to live in a encampment, is to get them help. And as you know, various cities have put funds aside to do that, and so have the state. Okay.
And my understanding of the many people who died during Uri, many of them were actually housed. So I know there may have been some that
I'm
were
talking
not.
about homeless individuals who
Right.
we've heard stories of, and I talked about, again, seems like yesterday, but 6 years ago, so many of them who were frostbitten or worse.
Yes.
Because the city of Austin refused to find them shelter. The city of Austin and other cities seemingly are okay with these unsheltered individuals being in harm's way. And what this bill does is it continues the efforts to find them assistance in getting them out of these areas.
So you're saying that the way the state is going to enforce the ban on people living on the streets, the homeless ban, is by giving people services. You said mental health care services and creating locations for the people who are on the streets?
There's two different things, right? So the first thing this does is it makes sure is that the cities are enforcing the current laws, which essentially do clear these areas out. Secondly, separately, through appropriations both from the cities, the counties, and our state appropriations. There are services that are available for these.
Gentleman's time has expired. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Hinojosa.
Chair recognizes Ms. Hinojosa.
Mr. Speaker and members, what this bill does is it penalizes localities, cities, mostly urban cities, for a homelessness problem that exists within our cities that we don't want. As the author of this bill said, nobody wants people living on the streets. But during the interim, I came to find out something that I think you would find very interesting. You see, I represent this part of Austin, and there is a church, St. David's Episcopal Church, and they have a wonderful homelessness ministry. I am friends with the woman who runs that. Her name is Andy Brower. Some of you may know her. And she asked me, can I come and meet with you with some of these people who are living on the streets in Austin? And I said, of course, come. She filled my office with all these people living on the streets, and I heard their story. And there was this one gentleman sitting so close to me, and he said, the thing is, I was brought here to Austin by the state of Texas. I have no connection to Austin, but the Department of Criminal Justice brought me to a halfway house on the east side of Austin. And then when I was paroled out, I was just here in Austin. I know nobody. I have no job. I have no family. I have no where to live. And by the way, I have no way to get the medication I need for my mental health problems. And by the way, you want me on my medication because the reason I ended up incarcerated is because I was not on my medication. He said, and many of us living on the streets come from that halfway house in East Austin. So that piqued my interest. And I went and I visited what is known as a transition center. It's the Austin Transition Center. It is a 421-person bed on the east side of Austin. I went and I started asking questions. It is run by a private prison corporation by the name of Core Civic. They have another operation in Dallas, another operation in Fort Worth, El Paso, and Corpus Christi. And what I learned was that of the entire population there in 2024, 1,371 people there, just 8% were from my county. Just 8% were from Travis County. The rest were brought to my county by the state of Texas, by TDCJ. When I met with the woman who runs the program, she said, oh, I am sure that many of the people who are living on the streets here in Austin come from this location because they get let out. We try to have a 100% employment rate. I asked, what is your employment rate? It was under 20%, and they count day labor as employment. The state is letting people out of the system. These are former offenders, formerly incarcerated people, into
Mr.
our
Speaker.
community.
The gentlelady yield for questions?
Will the gentlelady yield?
Let me just finish this point.
Absolutely.
Not at this time.
Into our community with no resources, no connection to anyone, and they are out here to fend for themselves in our city, and then we are blamed, like the author of this bill is doing, we are blamed for our homelessness problem in Austin when it is the state of Texas who is in large part creating a problem, because that is what happens when you don't have a safety net. We don't have a safety net. We're not bleeding libs, that's why we have a safety net. We have safety nets because it keeps our communities safe, right? I had one person once tell me, I want your kid to get an education Not because I care so much about your kid, but because I don't want your kid robbing my house. That's what happens when we don't give people the help that they need to get back on their feet when they come out of the system. We throw them into a community they have no connection to, and they end up living on the street. So what this amendment says is that you should not penalize the city for the problem when it is caused by an offender, a former offender who is living in your city, who did not come from your city, who was brought here by the state of Texas. And that is my amendment, and yes, I will answer your question.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Canales, for what
will the
purpose?
gentlelady yield for questions?
Yes.
The lady yields.
So I'm listening to your story, and so we, during an interim hearing and the time I've been in the legislature, did you know that cities play homeless wars? Meaning they round up their homeless, give them $100 and ship them to Corpus Christi. Or they round up their homeless and give them $100 and ship them to other cities. Are you aware that cities play homeless wars with each other?
I had never heard that before.
Well, they
Actually,
do, because it
Representative
came out in the
Canales.
testimony. And so what you're talking about is not only a TDCJ problem, is that cities, major cities, give homeless people $100 and a bus ticket and ship them to other cities. And so I'd just like this body to know that those are some of the facts that what we're living with in the state of Texas is some of the largest municipalities play games with each other to ship each other homeless. And instead of solving this problem, we're penalizing people.
Absolutely. And in fact, what we learned in this investigation into what this is all about is that the largest percentage of people we have in this transition center in the East Austin actually come from Bexar County, where they don't have a transition center because that community was able, through zoning and fighting, able to not have that in their county. So this is in large part a state-created problem, and what I'm saying is don't make our cities pay for it when you're creating it. If the problem and if the population you're dealing with is more than half of people who are not from your locality but were formerly incarcerated and brought to your city by TDCJ, then the city should not have to give up its tax receipts, its sales tax receipts, because it's being punished for something that is the state's fault. That is the amendment. It's a matter of basic fairness, and I hope the author of the bill will support this amendment, and I move adoption.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the lady yield for questions?
The
I
lady
do.
yield for questions. The lady yields.
Yes.
Representative Hinojosa,
Yes.
would it be fair to say that especially people who have just left prison, that they don't have any ability to take care of themselves if they don't have a job, they don't have a home, they don't have their medicine, they're not going to be able to take care of themselves, right?
That's right.
And it's not a matter of, well, why don't you just go somewhere else? They have nowhere to go. They have no ability to go anywhere.
That's right. And in fact, I asked the question, does TDCJ have to offer them a ride back to where they came from? And the answer is no.
So for all intents and purposes, if someone spent the last 10, 15 years in prison and they're just dumped off in Austin, they're essentially stuck in Austin.
They are. Yes,
Right.
they are. And our city really has invested so much to solve this problem, but it is very expensive. Austin spends upwards of $4,000 per person, $4,000 per person to provide temporary transitional housing for Texans. But for Texans who require more permanent housing, it's about $15,000 to $20,000 a year per person experiencing homelessness. And the thing is that if we have this spigot of this from the state of formerly incarcerated people being just left in our community with no ties to the community, we will never solve the problem of homelessness.
And
in
these
Austin.
people, these former incarcerated people, they have families somewhere else. They have homes somewhere else that they might be able to go to, but because they're left here, they don't have the ability to go back to where their loved ones are, where there's family support for them, and so they become a burden on the city.
Right. When you've hit rock bottom, You need family, you need friends, you need a support network to get back on your feet when you are dropped off in the middle of a community that is foreign to you. You can't have that help that you need. You don't often have that help that you need because you don't know anybody. And so, yes, people end up living on the streets in desperation, and it is very tragic, very sad, and Austin is doing everything we can, and cities all over this state
Ladies,
are
time
doing
has expired.
everything they can, but need some help. I move it.
The chair recognizes Mr. Capriglione in opposition.
Mr. Speaker, members, I know it's late, but I do want to talk about this amendment because I don't want anyone to accidentally vote for it. If you go and you look at this amendment, and I know folks here maybe have a hard time pulling it up, it has been this session, so I'd like you to pull up this amendment. And with all due respect to what Representative Canal says, that's not what this amendment does. In fact, what this amendment says is that the subsection, in other words, the enforcement of these camps should apply everywhere, except, and I quote, if more than 50% of the persons camping in that camp were released from prison. Literally what this amendment would do was allow only those encampments that were full of people that were released from prison, murderers and rapists. So, what I would do is when you look at this amendment and you read it, lines 5 through 8, you will realize that it is the exact opposite of the way you think it should be. This will only allow camps in Texas that are more than 50% of people that were released from prison by TDCJ and were left there from somewhere else. So with all due respect, not just no, Mr. Speaker, but no way.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for
The
questions?
gentleman yield for questions.
I do.
The gentleman yields.
Mr. Capriglione, what do you want the cities to do instead?
I would like to talk about this amendment, and what I would like them not to do
If you're
is what...
rejecting this amendment,
Okay, in terms of this amendment, what I would like the cities to do is nothing that this amendment says. I would like the cities to enforce this universally to everyone and not give an exception to those encampments that have more than 50% of the people that camping there released from prison. That doesn't make any sense.
so the cities, your expectation is the city disperses these people, tell them to go somewhere else, correct?
Well, if we're going to go back to this amendment, unless they're ex-cons, right?
That's very well.
What I would say is that we should vote this amendment down, and if we want to have a conversation about the merits of the bill itself, about enforcing the current law, we can have that. But I am not going to entertain the thought that we should only allow those camps full of ex-convicts.
Mr. Capriglione, you understand that the city is helping provide services, keeping an eye on people who are in these camps, making sure that they try to stay out of trouble as much as possible. We're trying to make sure that they get their medicine. You understand that if you tell them, go somewhere else, they probably will go somewhere else. They'll go into people's neighborhoods. They'll wander around somewhere else. They'll move to wherever you're not looking because they have nowhere else to go. So you would rather have people released from prison, you would rather them wander off where the city can't keep an eye on them, the city can't provide them with services, city can't provide them with medicine,
As opposed to
and go into your
camping in
neighborhoods?
public spaces near our schools and under bridges. I mean, listen, what we've all agreed in the past and we have on our budget is that we should fund and appropriate dollars to help people who are unsheltered, who need mental help, who to help them get ready to go to work, to go and get the support and assistance they have. And that we can agree on and we can have a conversation on. But since we're talking about this amendment, I would respectfully ask everyone to not vote to allow camps full of ex-cons.
So instead of that, you're going to say, send them everywhere else. Send them into the city, send them into the neighborhoods.
No, I'm not saying
Why
that
would
at
it not
all.
be
That's
better
not
to
what this
have them?
amendment says.
If
That's
the
not what
city
this
of
bill...
Austin is providing them with support and providing them with help, keeping an
There
eye on
is-
them.
there is-
If the city is trying to
I'd
do
like to answer
this,
at least one of your
but the
questions. I won't
state
remember
keeps
all of
dumping
them.
more people,
The members will refrain from speaking over each other so that the rest of the members can hear the debate.
What I would say, getting back to the amendment that's on the table, is that there isn't a single community in Texas, or in this country or in this world that would be okay with this amendment.
To
I
keep
close.
Ms. Hinojosa, to close on the amendment.
Members, I don't want you to accidentally vote for this amendment. I want you to vote for this amendment on purpose. The author of this bill is either mistaken in his reading of this amendment or misrepresenting. What this amendment says is that the state cannot require approval from them, the first part, approval from them if they have created the problem. If they've created the problem, we can't wait for them to fix it. It is a decision of the local community first. The second part of the bill says that we get information in the report that is required in this bill. We get information about how many of those people experiencing homelessness are from TDCJ and not from the locality. And the final part of this amendment says you can't penalize us financially by taking our sales tax money if the problem that the Attorney General is alleging based on a complaint is about somebody experiencing homelessness that the TDCJ brought to our community and has created the problem. We're saying you cannot punish the cities. You cannot put the heavy hand of the state on the locality and tell you how you're going to fix it when they created the problem themselves. And you certainly should do what we can to get information so we understand the scope of this problem, because I'm telling you, in Austin, it is big.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the lady yield?
The lady yield for questions.
Yes.
The lady yields.
Representative Sosa, how is a city supposed to solve this problem if every time they relocate people, they help people get somewhere else, they help people find homes, they help people find jobs, they clear out the camps, and the next day the state drops off more?
No, we will never solve the problem. The state is trying to blame the cities, trying to micromanage and put us through bureaucratic morass when we're trying to deal with a very real problem affecting the everyday lives of people in our local communities. The state wants to say no, first we have to approve, and then, by the way, if you don't do what we want, then we're going to take your money, and by the way, we don't even want to get information about the reality of the problem that's going on. That's what you're hearing from the author of this bill right now, who is opposing the amendment, because they know this is a problem that the state is creating. The state has created a homelessness problem in our cities and does not want to take responsibility for it.
Even under this bill, even if the city dealt with it and the people kept getting dropped off, the city could still lose money because they would say, well, you didn't keep dealing with it. You dealt with it yesterday, but there's more people there. And the city's like, we can't control that.
Right. It's a never-ending problem. And really the insult to injury is that the city can't act until the state approves the plan of the problem the state created, right? So it is tying the hands of the local communities. That is what the first part of this amendment does. And really, we need help. We don't need the state making it harder for us to solve this problem and taking away sales taxes that we need to do this work in our local communities. And I move adoption.
Ms. Hinojosa sends up an amendment. The amendment is not acceptable to the author. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Capriglione voting nay. Show Ms. Fairley voting nay. Have all voted? Have all voted? There being 54 ayes, 90 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Busey.
Chair recognizes Mr. Busey.
Hey, Mr. Speaker, members, the purpose of this amendment is to give cities more capacity to address the problems identified by the Attorney General and the residents of the city without impacting the 90-day timeline. And I believe it's acceptable to the author, and I move adoption.
Mr. Busey sends up an amendment. The amendment is acceptable to the author. A record vote has been requested. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Busey voting aye and Mr. Capriglione voting aye. Show Ms. Fairley voting aye. Have all voted? There being 122 ayes, 20 nays, the amendment is adopted. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Amendment by Flores.
Chair recognizes Ms. Flores.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, we can all agree that homelessness is an issue that must be addressed at every level of government. I completely agree with the bill's author that this means we cannot stand by when local governments refuse to take action despite calls to action from their constituents. However, as written, this bill fails to define what that action should be. The words "shall take an action to resolve the complaint" could mean anything from issuing citations to individuals that we all know cannot afford a meal, much less a fine, to forcefully removing homeless individuals without providing them with anywhere else to go. This amendment will clarify what actions a local entity must take to avoid being deemed a violating local entity and ensures that those actions are based on what the evidence tells us actually helps to reduce homelessness and subsequently homeless encampments. In response to a complaint about an illegal homeless encampment, a local entity must make a reasonable effort to connect the violating individual with housing resources, whether that be directing them to a legal encampment, providing them with resources from an appropriate nonprofit, or even helping them reconnect with family. These are tactics that we know work. These are methods that programs focused on homelessness, who understand it the best, are asking us to do. A comprehensive review of studies on Housing First programs indicates that focusing on finding housing for homeless individuals decreased homelessness by 88% and improved housing stability by 41%. Meanwhile, the providers who frequently interact with homeless individuals have repeatedly come out and stated that property seizures and arrests only decrease the trust that homeless individuals have in the government, making them less receptive to attempts to provide them with resources in the future. Let's look out for our constituents, those with and without a place to sleep at night, by instructing local governments to respond to these encampments with evidence-based solutions. I move passage.
Mr. Capriglione in opposition.
Mr. Speaker, members, some of this is already being done, and some of it really hasn't been fleshed out and would be very costly to locals. For those reasons and more, I oppose.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
would the gentleman yield for questions?
Will the gentleman yield for questions?
Yes. Yes.
The gentleman yields.
Thank you. Mr. Capriglione, I thought for sure you would accept this because
Did you really?
This
Did
is
you?
exactly what you want. You're telling cities, you cannot have these people here in these encampments. They need to go where they're supposed to go. This provision says you must tell people where they're legally supposed to go.
Well,
and instead of going somewhere else that they're not supposed to be.
Because I'm more than happy to do the A part of it. So what happened during the last, and what's in already the law in 2019, is some of those things that you just mentioned are already required. So that part is completely unnecessary.
Which part is already required?
Well, the part about letting people know and how to get help and how to get assistance, that's already in statute. The part that isn't, that's being added to this, is to require housing and alternative housing 150 days after the date the complaint is received. First of all, that's completely untenable and impractical because it is unlikely for us to know all the people that were subject of that camping 150 days after, because as you can tell, and as you know, they're unsheltered, so that would A, be impossible to do, and B, an expense to the localities, and so it would be an unfunded local mandate. I don't know how expensive, and neither do you, and neither does the author of this amendment. So for those reasons and more, I oppose this amendment.
The amendment says a reasonable effort to connect each person. That could be as little as handing someone a card. Here are the list of shelters
again,
that are in place.
No, it's not handing someone a card. It says making an effort to connect each person who is the subject of the complaint with alternative housing. So no.
A reasonable effort to connect them, like give them a phone number, give them a person to talk to, tell them, hey, the local shelter is at this location. I don't understand why that's so hard. Like, instead of suggesting that we do it in the law, why can't we say in the law, just do it? Tell them where they're supposed to go legally instead of being harassed and arrested every single time they go somewhere else.
I disagree with your understanding of the amendment.
That's
Thank
very
you.
unfortunate.
Ms. Flores, to close on the amendment.
I'll read what the amendment says so that we can understand it. It says that instead of taking action to resolve the complaint not later than the 90th day after the date the complaint is received, it substitutes the following. Make a reasonable effort to connect each person who is the subject of the complaint with alternative housing not later than the 150th day after the date the complaint is received, including by 1, providing the person information regarding locations where the person may legally camp and information regarding transportation to that location. 2, assisting the person with contacting a family member or other person to assist the person in vacating the campsite. And 3, assisting the person with contacting an appropriate government agency or nonprofit organization that provides housing assistance within the political subdivision. I myself have helped in an individual who I've seen in my park who had nowhere to go, super cold weather outside, and was just, helping him with giving him some food and something warm and dry to wear, and telling him, here are some numbers, here's the local shelter. You don't have to sleep in the park or under a bridge in the freezing cold. You need to go, and here's this shelter, and here's who helps, and here's where it's located. So, yes, I will yield to the gentleman with a question. Mr. Speaker?
Mr. Wu, for what purpose?
Mr. Speaker, would the lady yield for questions?
Yes, I will
The
yield
lady
for a
yields.
question.
Representative Flores, to be absolutely clear, when this amendment says make a reasonable effort, it goes ... by, including by, right? The reasonable effort are these three things, correct?
Right,
Number 1, tell them where they're supposed to go legally.
right.
Tell them where they're not supposed to go legally, right?
Right.
Tell them where, if you can't camp here, if you can't be here, where are you supposed to go?
Right.
Isn't
Exactly.
that what Mr. Capriglione wants?
I thought so, and I think these are pretty reasonable steps to take. As I said, I've taken them as a person myself, so people that are in the position to help the homeless can do these things.
If they're already not supposed to be there, and people don't want them in their neighborhoods, don't want them somewhere else, wouldn't we want them to know where they're legally supposed to go?
Absolutely, as any compassionate person would. You would want to make sure a person had shelter.
I mean, even without going into compassion, if you just want public safety, you want this problem to be dealt with, would you not want people who are homeless, who are unsheltered, to go where they're supposed to go, to where the people are helping them?
Absolutely, absolutely. But
The second-
I always lead with compassion first.
The second point, if somebody says, hey, I have a family member that can come pick me up, shouldn't we just say, hey, let me help you find a phone that you can call that person so they can come pick you up and you don't have to be here anymore? Isn't that what we want?
Absolutely.
How hard is that?
It shouldn't be that hard.
And the third one, contacting an appropriate government agency or nonprofit. Couldn't that just be, hey, here's a card with whatever nonprofit is in this area or the state agency that is in charge of helping you?
Absolutely, absolutely.
Why is that so difficult?
It shouldn't be difficult
It
at all.
shouldn't be. And on a bill that says on a law that says we will give you criminal charges if you don't leave, shouldn't we make sure that the people that we don't want to have to arrest know what they're supposed to do so they don't get arrested again?
Absolutely right. And I think we should. I mean, these are very reasonable steps, and I think we should be doing this.
I'm just floored. This is exactly what this bill and this author calls for, and he's not accepting it.
Members, these are perfectly reasonable steps for a local entity to take, and I say we lead with compassion, and I please ask for that you vote yes on this amendment. Thank you.
Ms. Flores sends up an amendment. The amendment is not acceptable to the author. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Ms. Flores voting aye, Mr. Capriglione voting nay. Ms. Fairley voting nay. Have all voted. There being 57 ayes, 87 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. The following amendment, the clerk will read the amendment.
Mr. Speaker,
Mr. Tinderholt, for what purpose?
parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Is the Speaker aware that this bill's taken over 40 minutes so far?
Chair is not advised.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Would the Speaker consider it dilatory for members of the House to stall and chub throughout the process so that other people's bills, important bills for senators, important bills for, I don't know, people's districts, are being killed?
Not a proper parliamentary inquiry.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
If there's a call to question, what is the maximum number of minutes that are allowed to be spoken during the entire process on any given bill? If I were to do a call to question or someone were to call it on any given bill, what is the maximum amount of time that can be spent speaking for and against?
After the previous question is ordered, the author of the proposition gets to close.
Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Would that be 10 minutes?
Yes.
And would it be 10 minutes pro, 10 minutes con?
Just the author of the proposition.
So, Mr. Speaker, parliamentary inquiry.
Please state your inquiry.
Does that mean that if someone did that motion on any given bill or all bills, moving forward, that the maximum amount of time to be spent on a bill would be somewhere between 10 and 20 minutes?
That is a hypothetical inquiry that the chair will not entertain.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Following amendment, clerk read the amendment.
Amendment by Jones of Dallas.
Ms. Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, this amendment ensures that we, as a state government, are not unnecessarily meddling in the affairs of well-functioning local government by limiting the authority of the Attorney General and DPS to enforce Section 48.05 of the Penal Code to the local entities that are in violation of the requirements in this bill. I do not disagree with the author that if local governments are unwilling to respond to the complaints of their constituents, that we may step in to give Texans the support they need. However, if a local entity is following the law, if they are successfully managing any encampments within their jurisdictions, if they have a system that works between them and their constituents, who are we to interfere with that? Why should we punish compliance with excessive control? Local governments can best manage local problems because they know their area and people better than any state or federal government could ever. Anyone who supports the freedom of local government and opposes state interference should understand the importance of this limitation and vote in favor of this amendment.
Chair recognizes Mr. Capriglione in opposition.
What does it do? Did you say what it does?
Yeah, I did. Let me read the amendment. All right, so
Mr. Speaker, members, I obviously just got this right now, but by looking at it, what it does is it removes the ability for us to enforce the current laws, and that's the whole entire purpose of this bill. And again, what's happened, members, as you can see, is that while we all in this legislature approve this law, the enforcement is not happening, and so any efforts to dilute that is not acceptable, so I say vote no.
Mr. Jones to close on the amendment.
I move adoption.
Mr. Jones sends up an amendment. The amendment is not acceptable to the author. This is a record vote. The clerk will ring the bell. Show Mr. Capriglione voting nay. Show Ms. Fairley voting nay. Mr. Tinderholt voting nay. Have all voted? Have all voted? There being 57 ayes, 87 nays, the amendment fails to adopt. Members, we're waiting on an amendment.